I know lots of you are in anatomy exam preparation mood right now, but one thing I can assure you about this presentation is that you will find it interesting, okay? Okay, so let's begin with the external features of the heart, like me. Okay, if you look at this, the two structures here, one on the left, one on the right. In this case, the right one is not the right one. Okay, so this right here is the first standard heart. The one on the left is your first MBBS heart, which is what we'll be talking about right now. Okay, now let's make this interesting. You know, it's not just me showing you pictures of the heart and then saying this is that, that is this, that is that, and all that stuff. Let's use a different approach, shall we? Instead of just me telling you everything, why don't we build the heart from scratch? Let's build it. Let's design the heart from scratch and give physical justifications as to why each and every part of the heart is the way it is. Okay? And like all great designs, we start with a box. We start with the box over here. Now, what is this box supposed to do? Now, our body has blood. Blood is not supposed to pull up in our body. It needs to flow regularly. We need to ensure that you get all the nutrients properly. So naturally, this box right here needs to do a pumping action. Such a pump inside your body. Okay? And if it's a pump, it needs to be flexible. So let's make this elastic. And since this needs to pump, it needs to contract and relax. So what is it? One tissue in our body that contracts and relaxes regularly? Muscles, right? Cool. Let's make this elastic and let's make this particular pump muscular. And since this is going to do a lot of contraction and relaxation, why not make this into an almost rounded rectangle kind of pump? Okay? So we have this pump over here, all are sorted. Cool? Now, we have this pump, okay? It can contract, relax, it's elastic, all fine, good. Can we stop here? We can't stop here, right? Okay, and I'll tell you why we can't stop here. Okay, let me give you an illustration. You guys know toothpaste, right? Of course you know toothpaste. Now, let's say the toothpaste is almost over. So what do you do to get that toothpaste out? You brush it, right? Okay? You paid for the whole toothpaste, you use the entire toothpaste. Typical Indian mentality, right? So, now, obviously, what do you do in that case? Let's say there are two ways you can go about this. One, you crush the toothpaste like this. What will happen? Toothpaste will come out. But will a lot of toothpaste come out? No, right? Why? Because you are applying force in all the directions and they cancel each other out. And they cancel each other out, guess what? You're still making that force happen, right? You're putting work by crushing, which is wastage of energy. So you correlate that to this. If you try to contract and all the sides of this particular chamber over here, do you really think you'll get an effective blood flow outside? No, we can't, right? Because the forces get cancelled out, and on top of that, it's very energy inefficient because you're putting a lot of work. So, of course, some change needs to happen. Now, let me get back to the toothpaste example. How do you actually get it out? You squeeze it like this, right? In the peristaltic movement. You squeeze it like this, right? Bit by bit. And let's use the same mechanism here. A peristaltic movement of sorts, where you contract and relax the top region and the bottom region, contract and relax successively. So there is even flow of blood outside, and it's continuous and is also sufficiently fast enough to exit the chamber. Okay? Let's give that peristaltic contraction mechanism over here. So this pump now has that. Okay? So let's experiment this. Let's put in some blood. Okay, this blood flow. Fine. Are we done here? No, right? Because the blood flows inside, and of course it's pumped out. However, don't you think there'll be some backflow? There'll be some regurgitation, right? There'll be some backflow over here because of the contraction action. It's very spacious inside. So there'll be some backflow which causes regurgitation, and what happens? You get turbulence. And what is the thing about turbulent flow? Very energy inefficient, right? Now, of course, this energy inefficiency is now because of the blood itself and not the chamber. So we have to figure out a way to sort this out. This can be sorted if you just figure out a way to ensure blood flows in a single direction only. Unidirectional blood flow. So what do? Valve. Excellent. You put a valve, exactly. In mechanical engineering, in order to ensure the fuel goes in one direction, does not get out of the engine, you use valves, right? we use a biological valve in this case. So this biological valve, as you can see, divides the chamber into upper half, lower half. It's at the center, and it ensures unidirectional flow. One basic logical question: if this is going to divide into two halves anyways, okay, and upper part contracts independently, lower part contracts and relaxes independently, why don't we have this two-chamber arrangement? Make it two chambers, right? Simple, and put the valve inside. And since the valve is an internal structure, I won't be discussing that in this presentation, but let it be a two-chambered structure. So finally, you get a pump which is two-chamber. Heart not only pumps one type of blood, it pumps two types of blood, right? Deoxygenated and oxygenated. Okay? So naturally, it's obvious to expect another one just like this. Cool? There's another one just like this over here. Right side is for deoxygenated, the left is for oxygenated. Let's just make that arrangement. Okay, of course, they're connected to each other, but that comes with a blood circulation, which we will not discuss now. Now, look at let's name this as right upper. Okay, this will be the right upper, left lower, left lower chambers. We have 4 chambers right now. Okay, now look at the left lower chamber. Okay, this needs to pump blood to the rest of the body by systemic circulation, right? Which means, and the left one over here needs to pump just to what? Lungs, right? So naturally, why do we have equal volumes for both? The one on the left should have higher volume of blood than the one on the right, right? So let's accommodate for that. Let's make the right one smaller and the left one larger. So now the left one can pump blood to the rest of the body, right one just pumps it to the lungs alone. Okay? Now on top of, now volume is taken care of. Now let's talk about force. Why? Because the left one needs to pump it to the rest of the body. So imagine the pressure that it has to go against, right? So the left one needs to, excuse me. So the right lower one needs to pump it to the rest of the body with a high level of force. How can we accommodate for that? Let's make it conical. Because of the tapering of the conical shape, right, you can get a lot of, a huge boost in terms of flow. Okay, to ensure that it sends a lot of blood very forcefully to the rest of the body. And since the left one is conical, let's make the right one also conical for symmetry purposes, so that they can accommodate well with each other. Now I'd like to take your attention to the lower part here, the lower part of these cones. Okay, this needs to rest on top of the diaphragm. So can this be flat? It can't be flat, right? You have to have a curvature, so let's give it a curvature. And now since it's on the diaphragm now, it's the heart, it's on the diaphragm. Heart is cardio, diaphragm is phrenic. Why don't we call this the cardiophrenic angle? Cardiophrenic angle, go. And now let me divert your attention to the 2 chambers at the top, the right and left upper chambers. Okay? Now think about it. Blood needs to flow into these chambers. Okay? They enter inside. You enter inside a room. And the folks of the Latin days, what they call rooms? Atrium. So why don't we call this the right and left atrium? Okay? Now let me go take your attention to the lower chambers over here, the ones that looks like cones and everything. They are like the water bellies that people in the ancient days used to use. Now we have plastic bottles, and they used to use elastic leather bottles. They call them as bellies. Okay? So of course they didn't call it bellies exactly. The Latin term for a water belly is a ventricle. So why don't we call this a left and right ventricle? And of course, in this case, it's not a water belly, this is a blood belly if you think about it. And now we have at least a part of the 4 chambers of the heart sorted out. Let's turn this towards the right. Okay, I hope you will appreciate this. I'm turning this towards the right. Okay, I told you that the right atrium, okay, needs to take in something. So the vessel, there needs a vessel. You need a vessel for that. It needs to take in stuff from the top part of the body and the bottom part of the body as well. So you need 2 entries. Okay. Let's give it that. So I have 2 entries over here. And so since in anatomical terms, if a vessel goes away from an organ, it's a vein. If it goes towards the organ, it's an artery, except for the heart. So since these are all taking in stuff from the organs, they're coming from the organs, these are veins. But they are big. It's like as if you have to enter the room, you have to go through a cave. So why don't we call this the vein cave or the vena cava? And since there are 2 of these, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Okay? So the right atrium is sorted out. Let's bring it back to the front view. Now the right ventricle needs to send the blood where? Lungs, right? The closest pathway you can take will be like this. Okay? And since there are two lungs, we need to have a diversion towards the left as well as the right. Let's accommodate for that. Since this is on top of the heart, and since it's coincidentally shaped like a T, why don't we call this, and this is going towards the lungs, why don't we call this the pulmonary trunk, which has pulmonary arteries, left as well as right. Now, just like the right ventricle, the left ventricle also has a pumping job. So let's give it an accommodation as well. But this needs to pump with the rest of the body. So can it be as thin as the pulmonary trunk? No, right? It has to be larger. The luminal diameter has to be slightly larger. And now this is no longer like a trunk. This is like a pillar rising out of the heart. And Latin people used to call pillars, great rising pillars, as aorta. So let's just call it that, aorta. Okay? Of course, there's loop, ascending, descending, thoracic abdomen, and all that stuff, but we're not going to go into that in this session. Now let's turn this from the front view to the left side view. Something is entering the right atrium. We sorted that out. Now something needs to enter the left atrium as well, right? From where? The lungs. So, and since it's coming up from the lungs, we'll call it a vein. And we'll not just give two, we'll give four of them. We give four of them so that we can accommodate for any sort of lags or delays. Okay? Oxygenated blood is, the fresh form of blood is coming inside our heart. So we need to make sure no delays happen, right? So let's give extra accommodation of 4 veins over here. So just 2 veins. And now we have pulmonary veins. Okay? Let me now bring this back to the front view. So this is how it looks so far. And this is the sternocostal surface or the anterior surface. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to give you the schematic representation of the heart. And then later in the session, we look at the realistic view and then compare both of them. Now in the schematics, these are not just random shapes to you. You understand why everything is shaped a certain way, right? And with that, you'll be able to appreciate the realistic picture much better. Okay, so this is the sternocostal surface or the anterior surface of the heart. Just like that, we have the posterior surface or the base of the heart. Majority of it is formed by the left atrium right over here and the right atrium. Okay, and part of the vena cava. And now we have the diaphragmatic surface or the inferior surface as a cardiophrenic angle, right? The bottom surface is the inferior surface, major contribution from what? Left ventricle as opposed to the right ventricle. This is the bottom surface of the heart. And then, for completion's sake, a right surface as well as left surfaces. We have all these schematics. Okay? And now, for last but not the least, icing on the cake, let's give 2 extra structures to the heart over here. Now, naturally, the blood is entering inside the atrium, right? It's coming from everywhere in your body. It's entering inside the atrium. Don't you think it's going to enter with a lot of rigor and pressure and everything, right? It's going to be very turbulent inside the moment it enters. So naturally, to accommodate for that turbulence, let's give some bladed-like appearances. Okay, bladed-like appearances made of muscles within the atrium itself, so that as it enters with full turbulence, those muscular blades, right, takes care of making it from turbulent to laminar flow. And let's give some extra space within the right atrium so that you can accommodate that extra turbulence. And since it's a room within a room, a small room in Latin is known as an auricle. So let's give it a right as well as a left auricle for completion's sake of the heart. Now all that extra turbulence is taken care of. Okay? Now, you might be like, we are done over here, right? Now think about this. Of course, external features of the heart is done almost. Now the heart has the job of pumping blood to the rest of the body, right? It does a lot of work, it does hard work to do that. However, what about the heart itself? It needs to have its own blood supply, right? You have to take care of the heart also, right? Like Dr. Pravina said, charity begins at home. So before you help others, help yourself first, right? So the heart, in order to help itself, needs its own vein as well as artery supply. Okay? Question is, where do we put the arteries and veins of the heart? We can't just let it, hang around like this, right? We have to accommodate them somewhere. And that's why I want to take your attention to the spaces between the chambers. Okay? Over here. So there's a space between, these are the spaces between the chambers, which I'll get into soon. And not just that, we have spaces at the diaphragmatic surface as well. So now on the sternocostal surface and the diaphragmatic surface, we have spaces where we can accommodate the vessels of the heart. So this is very efficient cable management, or in this case, vessel management. That is what we are going to discuss. Next, we're going to look at the realistic pictures. So you've seen the schematics. I put the schematics on the left for your reference. I want you to correlate whatever you saw schematically and with a physical justification to the one on the right. Okay? Hope you can appreciate this. Okay? I'll be sending this to you later, so don't worry. So, one thing which I want to show you is the inferior border, mainly formed by the right ventricle over here. Okay, so that's the inferior border, and this is the sternocostal surface. Now let's look at the right side of the right surface of the heart. As you can see, we have a right border over here formed by the low part of superior vena cava and inferior vena cava and part of the right ventricle here. So you have the right border, and I hope you can appreciate and correlate how the structures are. Then you have the left side of the heart, with the left border formed by the left ventricle and the left auricle, as clearly demarcated here. And the diaphragmatic or inferior surface of the heart, majorly formed by the left ventricle and minor by the right ventricle. Okay. And of course, the base or the posterior surface of the heart, where you can appreciate the left atrium along with its incoming pulmonary veins, and of course, part of the ventricles and other chambers as well. Okay, now let's talk about how we can accommodate the vessels. On the sternocostal side, on the right part of it, the right half of it, there is a chamber, there's a gap or a groove or a sulcus between the atrium and the ventricle. It's on the front, it's on the right side. So in the right half of the anterior atrioventricular sulcus, let's put the right coronary artery and the small cardiac vein. Okay, so that's the content of this particular book. Now, if there's a right half, there's a left half as well. In that, let's accommodate the left coronary artery, which goes on to become the circumflex artery, and the great cardiac vein. And what is this thing about the great cardiac vein? It actually comes from the anterior interventricular sulcus, between the two ventricles on the anterior side, where we accommodate the anterior interventricular artery and the great cardiac vein. I think most of you just know this. This is mainly for revision purposes. And of course, on the diaphragmatic surface, since we have some areas where you can use to accommodate this, why don't we put the anastomosis of all the cardiac veins, of the right coronary artery as well as the circumflex artery. Right side, right coronary artery. Left side, circumflex artery. Anastomose right over at the posterior atrioventricular sulcus. And finally, at this part, we have major veins of the heart, right? Let them all drain into this particular joining region known as the coronary sinus of the heart. Okay, and coincidentally, all of this forms a small cross-like arrangement. So the posterior interventricular sulcus, interatrial sulcus, and interventricular sulcus. Posterior atrioventricular sulcus, interventricular sulcus, and the atrial sulcus form a cross, known as the crux cardus. Known as the crux means cross, cardus is heart. Okay. And finally, we put the posterior interventricular artery over here, which is on the posterior interventricular sulcus and the middle cardiac vein. Okay, for completion's sake, let's look at the superior surface of the heart and superior border. This is all the great vessels exit out of the superior surface. They look like this. And finally, the coronary sinus, okay, which is clearly shown here, the meeting point of all the major vessels, the veins of the heart. Last but not the least, the apex of the heart and incisura apicis cardis. Now the heart, I told you, it's going to be a cone. The ventricles are conical shape. What do cones have? Cones have an apex. They have a point part. But it can't be exactly very pointy, right? We have to make it a little bit blunt to accommodate the sternum and every other surrounding part within the mediastinum, right? So you have to make sure there's some sort of blunting or incision to ensure that there is proper accommodation of the sternocostal surface of the heart. So we put an incision in this case, and we call that the incisura apicis cardis, the incision on the apex of the heart. Okay. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Rajanandini ma'am for helping out with the pictures, as you can see in the background here. And I would also like to thank Dr. Kalevani ma'am for the opportunity and the entire anatomy department for this particular session. With that, I would like to say this session is not just from my mind, it's also from my heart. Thank you.